Hi, I'm Jimmy Steele. I've been playing saxophone for nearly 20 years and teaching it for over 10. And this is everything you need to get started on your saxophone. Let's get into it. So to begin with, we'll look at everything you might find with your first saxophone in its case. If you haven't got a saxophone yet, then I have some advice on buying your first saxophone in my 8-minute saxophone knowledge video here on YouTube, which I'll link below. So this is an alto saxophone, which you're most likely to have got as your first saxophone, and the same principles will apply to any saxophone you may have, such as the tenor, though the necks and mechanisms may vary more if you picked up something less common like a baritone or soprano saxophone. So what I'll do is I'll show these after we've been over the alto. We have the main body, we have the neck, we have the mouthpiece, and then for the mouthpiece, a reed, which actually vibrates to create the sound, and what's known as a ligature, which holds the reed onto the mouthpiece. There are many accessories you can then get for a saxophone, and we'll go through what you actually need and what you don't as we go. With the body of a saxophone, it looks a lot more complicated than it is to play, so try not to let that put you off. You could even think of this as a big recorder with buttons if you've played one at school, and it's arguably even easier to play than one of those, as you don't have to cover up the sound holes with your fingers. You just press the keys down and they close for you. It's also sturdier than it looks, so you don't need to be wary of handling it gently. You can quite happily just grab it to pick it up. But there's a few things I would advise. The first thing will be don't drop it. You can break things in endless ways and end up having to get it fixed. So with the newer style of saxophone that you'll most likely have, it's important not to lie it down on this side. If you're going to lie it down somewhere, I would lie it down this way. And the reason being is so that you're not going to put pressure on these keys here and the springs that are in there, because when you're lying it down, you'll just have them open like that. In reality though, I used to leave my saxophone lying down like this all the time as a kid overnight, and it was totally fine, so it would probably be okay. So you'll see as the body is stored in the case here, you've got this bit of black plastic on the end. This is known as a stopper or end plug and helps prevent the saxophone both moving in the case and protects this rod mechanism here from getting bent. If you haven't got one with your saxophone, you can actually use something like a wine cork to do the job. Just keep an eye on it if it goes mouldy. As an alternative to stoppers, you may see these cleaning pad savers which stay with the saxophone in the case to absorb the moisture. But I wouldn't bother with these, as if you think about it, the moisture is still in the case when you leave it in. I've also tried cutting off the ends of these to act as stoppers, but they never really fit as well as an actual stopper. So on the note of protecting your saxophone in its case, I see a lot of people going to open the case before they've put it on a flat surface on something like this chair. So just make sure that whenever you're going to open the case, it's always just on something flat instead. So the next part of the saxophone is the neck, and this goes into the saxophone body. So what I'll do is I'll show you the best way I found of putting it into the body, because you need to be careful of not damaging this rod mechanism that we talked about earlier. So what you'll maybe see on the top of your saxophone is you've got two screws, and the one you actually want to have open to receive the neck is going to be the one that's most likely on your right. The other screw is for when you have a music stand being clipped into your saxophone, such as if you're in a marching band, for example. So what I do is I make sure the screw's kind of loose. I pinch the mechanism like this so it's open, and this protects this bit here getting caught on the rod here, and then I simply put it into the saxophone. And I found that rotating it left and right like that is the easiest way in. You may be tempted to think that you need a bit of grease to help this go in, but you actually want it quite stiff and tight so that it's sealed for airflow. And then what I do then is just tighten this up finger tight, and you want to make sure that the neck is facing away from the front of the saxophone, so you know you've not accidentally put it in back to front like if it was like that. So it doesn't really matter where the kind of neck sits in terms of its angle. You'll find that there's probably some sort of welding joint here, which you can use as a rough guide to get you started to line it up with this rod mechanism here. Though it doesn't really matter, as long as this kind of mechanism isn't getting caught on the rod and it's not opening the top of the mechanism here, then it's fine. And everything with the saxophone is designed to be adjustable, so you can set it up as comfortably as possible for you. So in case you've got a baritone saxophone, here's what your neck might look like and where it goes. If it's an older style neck, like on my baritone, then the mechanism is still on the neck. Or if you've got a modern baritone, it's actually just a pipe, so it's just a much simpler neck like that. So if you've got a soprano saxophone, you might have got multiple necks, and you'll have the mechanisms on the top here. Or you might actually just have a straight soprano where there's no neck at all and you just have a straight pipe. We're now going to look at everything you might need for your mouthpiece and how to assemble it. This is a plastic or ebonite mouthpiece, typical of what you might have as your first mouthpiece. You can also get metal ones which sound a bit different, but either is fine. What you want to see if you can identify on your mouthpiece is the tip opening, and this is a number that signifies how far away the reed sits from the mouthpiece. So it's the tiny gap that's right here. This is usually stamped somewhere on the side of the mouthpiece and generally ranges from a size 4 to a 9. If you see a star, that means it's a half size, i.e. a 4 star would be a 4.5. If there is no number, it generally means that it's a small tip opening. As a beginner, you want to try and start on something small if possible, such as a 4. This will be easier for you to play in the initial stages, as the smaller gap between the mouthpiece and the reed means it will be easier to blow to make a sound. If you only have the one mouthpiece though, don't worry, just work with what you have. All it will mean is that you might need to blow a bit harder. One accessory for the mouthpiece that I'd say is 100% worth getting is a mouthpiece patch, and a rubber one if possible, as they're a bit softer. This acts as a cushion and protects both the mouthpiece and your teeth from damage, especially important if you're playing for a long time. And I'll just show you where it goes on the mouthpiece. So this is the top where your teeth are going to go, and it doesn't really matter where it goes. I just kind of put the patch on, maybe a little bit better than that, not hanging over the edge of the mouthpiece. So just something like that. There we go, and then your teeth will go onto the top of the mouthpiece there. The next piece of equipment is the reed. This is what vibrates to make the sound when you blow, and it's typically made of natural cane, though it is now also common to see synthetic and semi-synthetic reeds for different sounds and purposes. Similar to the mouthpiece tip opening scale, the reeds have their own sizing scale. There's no universal standard for this, and one size in one manufacturer may be completely different to the same size in another manufacturer. You'll generally find sizes ranging between 1.5 to 4. The higher the number, the thicker the reed, which means it will be harder to blow. Therefore, as a beginner, I would recommend a 1.5 to start with, and if possible, something like a Rico 1.5, as I found them to be of the highest quality. This is a Rico 2, which is slightly stronger than a Rico 1.5, but if you just look for the D'Addario Rico 1.5, a 2 would also be fine though, to be honest, because it's still quite a thin reed, so it'll still be quite easy to blow. I've also found the D'Addario reeds to be good for consistency, and consistency is something that is usually hard to come across in reeds due to the fact that they are made from a natural material. Reeds are quite delicate, especially on the thin edge, as you'll come to learn, so I'd get rid of any reed that's perhaps cracked or missing a chunk, as it will never play as well as it should. It's best to keep your reeds protected, either in the small cases they come with, or on the actual mouthpiece themselves, with a mouthpiece cover over it. So what I'll quickly do is just build the mouthpiece back up, very roughly, and then put the cover over it, so that will protect the reed when you're not playing it. The final crucial part of the mouthpiece is the ligature. This is what holds the reed onto the mouthpiece, and again they come in many different types, but they all serve the same purpose. This 2-screw type is what you'll most likely come across with your first mouthpiece. What I'll now do is show you how to put it all together. So this does seem quite fiddly at first, but I promise it will soon become second nature and you'll be able to put it all together quickly without thinking about it. I would start by putting the reed onto the mouthpiece first of all, and I'd actually make sure the reed is a little bit damp, as this will help the reed vibrate to create the sound and also help it stick to the mouthpiece. You can do this just by licking it like a stamp. You'll notice that one side of the reed is flat, and this is the side that goes onto the mouthpiece. You want to remember flat edge to flat edge. I would next roughly line up the reed like so, but I wouldn't worry too much about where it is for now, as it's inevitably going to move right up until the point where you've got it onto the saxophone. So as long as you've kind of roughly got it lined up for now, that's fine. So I'm holding the bottom of the reed here with my thumb, and I'm going to slide the ligature over the top, being careful not to catch the reed on the way over, and then screw it closed finger tight. Again, don't worry too much about where everything is just now, as it's inevitably going to move around as you put the mouthpiece onto the saxophone. So I'm going to show you my top tip for getting everything in place with ease. We're actually going to go back to the saxophone for a moment and get you wearing it with your neck strap. The neck strap is an essential accessory for your saxophone, as it allows you to hold it in the correct position for playing. The one that comes with your saxophone might look like this, and sadly these are quite poor as they're not very comfy or secure in terms of holding your saxophone. If possible, I would upgrade to something like this. Having a quality neck strap will make playing the saxophone more enjoyable and means you'll be able to play for longer. So you should find one or more receiving hooks on the back of your saxophone that look like this, roughly halfway up. And this is where you attach your neck strap hook. Don't worry about the height of your saxophone on the neck strap yet, as we'll adjust this once the mouthpiece is in place. You can now have the saxophone resting like this, and I would always let it rest over to this side, but make sure it's secure before you take your hands off it, because you don't want it falling down. This is going to give you a perfect position to get your mouthpiece on and set up. And next, take your pre-assembled mouthpiece, and it's going to go onto the cork on the end of the neck. So the easiest way I've found doing this again is just rotating it back and forth like so. How far the mouthpiece goes onto the cork is actually how you tune a saxophone, but it doesn't really matter now how far it goes on. But I would try and get it onto the cork as far as it will go without going over the actual end of the cork. This will help you to keep the saxophone more in tune whilst you're learning, so that you should start to know what the notes actually sound like. If it's a bit stiff going on, which it might be with a fresh cork on a new saxophone, then it's okay to use a little bit of cork grease to help it. Perhaps just have something like a paper towel handy to wipe off the excess grease. We're going to make sure everything's in the right place, and this is why having the saxophone on the neck strap at this angle is a great aid. You probably want to loosen off the ligature again and then line up the reed like so, and notice how I'm using my thumbs at the bottom of the reed to move it as opposed to pushing it down from the top here, which could damage the reed. So I'm making sure that the edges of the reed line up perfectly with the edges of the mouthpiece. You want it to be as accurately lined up as possible, as even the smallest difference can mean it won't perform as well. You can very gently press it in the top of the reed like so to make sure it's lined up. Once you're happy, get the 2 screws of the ligature tightened back up, just finger tight is fine. So that's it, we just need to make sure the saxophone is at the correct height and position, and then you're good to go. One last piece of advice on the mouthpiece, which I touched on earlier, is having a mouthpiece cap or cover, if I can find it, to go over the mouthpiece. This protects the reed from damage when you're not playing it. Your saxophone should have hopefully come with one of these, so have a look in your case if you're not sure. We'll now look at where your hands go. It's actually your left hand that goes on the top and your right hand down the bottom. For your right hand, you should have some sort of thumb rest on the back, and then your fingers come over and you put your first 3 fingers on the first 3 big keys like so, where the pearls are. You want to have the ends of your fingers resting on the keys, but not pressing down in a way, so essentially just relaxed. Your little finger just rests on these couple of keys here. Another thing to be aware of is not accidentally leaning into these keys on the side. Therefore, I keep a somewhat curved but relaxed posture with my right hand. This is always one of the places to check you're not accidentally leaning on some unwanted keys if you're getting a funny sound. We won't actually use the right hand for the first few notes, but it's good to get into the habit of getting it into the right position now. Where the left hand sits looks a bit more complicated, but the saxophone is ergonomically designed, so it will feel natural as to where your fingers sit once you know where you're putting them. You'll see on the rear of the saxophone that you have another thumb rest for your left hand, and it's usually some sort of round disc like this. You'll see that there's a key next to this rest, which you don't need to use just now, but it's good to get into the habit of having your thumb next to it, as eventually you'll be using it all the time, like that. As with the left hand, your first 3 fingers will come over like this and press down on these 3 keys. This should feel quite natural, and notice how I'm skipping over the small key in between the first and the second finger. I'm also skipping the big key at the top below the first finger. This key might look different depending on what saxophone you have, so I'll show you both variations now. With the left hand, it is even more important to curve it round so that you're not pressing down on these side keys here, like we saw with the right hand. In terms of the height and the position of the saxophone, you want to adjust it so that the mouthpiece naturally comes to your mouth, like so. You don't really want it too low that you're having to lean over, or you don't want it too high so that it's pushing you back and it's uncomfortable. Just whatever feels most natural to you. I actually prefer mine a little lower now that I've been playing for over 20 years. You can adjust quite a lot on the saxophone, such as the mouthpiece angle, neck angle, like so, the height. You can even adjust the thumb rest on the back if you've got a screw like this, and you can normally pivot them kind of up or down and left and right as well. Don't be afraid to experiment and find what works best for you. Just make sure that the mechanism on the neck isn't getting opened if it's too far to either side, like I showed you earlier. Now let's finally play your first note. So to make a sound, I bring the mouthpiece towards my mouth, which I then open as if I'm about to speak. I place the mouthpiece in my mouth, and I'm not just biting anything here, I'm just resting my top teeth on the top of the mouthpiece patch like I was discussing earlier. I seal my lips around the mouthpiece so that no air is going to escape, and then I just blow. So I'll just do that a couple of times. So and that's it. Congratulations, you just played your first note. The way in which you apply your mouth to the mouthpiece is called your embouchure and is often overcomplicated. I never really think too much more about it than I explained there, but here's some further pointers and troubleshooting. I'm definitely not biting with my bottom teeth, because this would make the reed squeak. I'm also just letting my tongue sit naturally and out of the way for now. One thing to consider is how far along you slide your mouth down the mouthpiece. The further along you are, the more shriller and uncontrollable the sound is, as you're no longer near the tip opening, where the gap between the mouthpiece and the reed is larger and therefore more controllable. The further back you are though, the softer the sound is, as you're closer to the end of the tip opening, so the sound is more controllable. So therefore, I'd err on the side of staying further back on the mouthpiece. Here's a demonstration of both so you can see what I mean. When you made your sound earlier, you may have actually been playing a note whether you were aware of it or not. Even if you weren't pressing any keys down, that's actually known as a C sharp. I'm now going to show you your first 3 notes. So just using the keys with your left hand first, close the key under your first finger. This is known as a B and is physically the same on whatever type of saxophone you're playing. When you put your second finger down as well as the first finger, this is known as an A. When you put all 3 fingers down, that's known as a G. So we have B, A, and G. I'll now play each of these notes on all the saxophones so that you can hear what they sound like, so you can make sure you're making the right sound. I'm going to play them a little lower than how you would normally tune a saxophone, because as you're learning and still developing your embouchure, you're likely to be playing the notes a little lower, which is what's known as playing the notes flat. If you're playing a soprano saxophone, it will sound like the same note as a tenor, but at a higher pitch. And if you're on the baritone, it will be the same as the alto, but at a lower pitch. If the notes you were playing were coming out too high like this, or you were squeaking, your embouchure was probably too tight, so try and keep your lips as relaxed as possible whilst maintaining the seal around the mouthpiece to keep them at the right pitch. You can also try looking at the reed again just to make sure it's sitting correctly. And this sounds daft, but sometimes it's worth just taking the reed off and on again to solve the problem. The main thing to remember for now is not to worry too much about any squeaking or wrong notes, just keep practicing little and often to build up your embouchure. So there you have your first 3 notes on the saxophone. I hope this video was useful. I'm a big advocate of having a teacher in person in the initial stages, so if possible, try and find a teacher or other saxophone player that you can go through this video with to keep you on the right track. If you have any questions, feel free to let me know in the comments.